Hello to Anatomy Awareness. Going to focus today on the support through the outer part of the hip, which is involved in my standing support and a lot in walking, moving through space, so many kinds of dance movements. So when I'm thinking about this bone-wise, I've got my pelvis here, big pelvis bone, and my pelvis balanced on top of my two legs here. So I have the ball and the legs going out and down. And I'm sorry I don't have my skeleton model here with me. But going to focus on this outer part of the hip here as support. So this muscle, gluteus medius, attaching along the line of your pelvic bone here and going down into the outer greater trochanter part of the hip. So just to feel that muscle in motion, just a preliminary so that you know what we're working with here, just going to take simple tendu to the side. So I'm going out in parallel and out. And the action of sliding this leg out to the side, I'm activating here this outer part of the hip. So you can see possibly with my hand how the distance between these 2 points gets shorter, gets longer, gets shorter, gets longer. I'm going to do that on the other side as well. So here just feeling again and starting to get a sense of possibly some muscular sensation going on in that area. And a couple more. Good. So if I just stand normally, and especially if I kind of sink down into my legs, it can be hard to feel, you know, I may feel grounded in a certain way, but it's not a very steady position. Whereas if I take my hands here and I give myself a sense of activating these muscles, lifting myself up, all of a sudden I feel much more stabilized. And I'm going to work on that with some movements in a moment, but first just want to allow for a sense of activation side-side. So if I'm walking, my hips are going to shift side-side. So here I'm just doing, you know, simple in place, shifting side-side to feel that action. And depending on what dance style I'm doing, I might do a little more of a shimmy. Or I might have a little more of a sense of a Latin kind of movement. Or I can waddle. So that a very different balance idea or movement idea than the standard walking. So with each of those things, I'm using one side to move me through space over to the other side, and the other side is kind of putting the brakes on. So particularly if I'm thinking about being on a standing leg, if I'm on 2 legs, I have my pelvis, my center of gravity, centered over these 2 spots here. If I want to balance on one leg, I need to take this, and particularly the center point, and move it over enough that it is somewhere over that 1 foot. So just feeling that here. Again, I could do that possibly by tilting, but generally with many technique movements, I'm going to want to keep my pelvis square up and down. So then just taking that over to the other side, your shifts may feel slightly different, one side versus the other. Usually one side might be a little bit stronger, one side might be a little bit more secure, one side might be the side that you more prefer to balance on. So going to take just a simple sequence of leg movements, and we'll stick with parallel to the front for right now, but again, to get that sense of the support through here. So I'm just going to take a little foot press and extend tendu and through the point and up to passe. So as I'm doing that, this side support here is helping to keep me on my standing leg, but it may also be helping to direct me in the leg that's moving. So again, I'm going to think of giving myself that little lift up and see if it feels different to foot press and tendu and press through the foot and lift. One more time, foot press and tendu and through the point and lift. And now other side. So again, first I'll do it without. So foot press and tendu and point and lift, and foot press and tendu and point and lift, and then giving myself a little extra lift, foot press and tendu and point and lift, and foot press and tendu and point and lift. So again, that giving me a little extra lift up. I can apply as well in some two-legged standing positions, particularly for those of you, so just take a demi-plie. And for some of you, your structure may be such that tendency is to fall in a little bit, that those knees roll in towards each other. So again, if I have this sense of a support holding me up on these outsides, that starts to guide my knees a little bit more clearly here. And one more time. So taking that down and up. Good. So again, if I drop into this, we'll talk about this more in a moment, or in a little while, then that gives a little bit of a stretch through here. And other side is that the side that's dropping is falling away, and this is needing to stretch a little bit. Again, as I'm shifting, and especially if I'm shifting a lot, if I'm doing an overshifted movement through space, this again going to help to put on the brakes, but to determine where I can go. So I'm going to do some exercises of different kinds to kind of bring awareness to this area. And there are a number of nerves coming out from your spine, going down to create energy in your legs. So often with this area can be kind of sensitive. So don't do too many repetitions on some of these things, but see how you do. So first going to come down to lying on the floor and going to think about some bridging movement. So in this particular bridge that I'm going to focus on right now, I'm going to think of a neutral lift of my pelvis as opposed to a curling, sequencing, articulating lift. So if I'm doing the curling lift, that's going to get a little bit more of the hamstrings, gluteus maximus going to be involved. Now here, if I am lifting up in a more neutral sense, it's not that those aren't working, but that I get more of the support also coming from this outside of the hips, specifically the fibers that are more the part of the muscle that's more towards the back. So first just taking that up and down a few times to get a sense of possibly having this sensation, but also seeing how high do you go, how easy, how difficult is this. And a thing that can get in the way is hip flexors limiting or getting in the way of the movement. So to experiment with that for a second, I'm going to give myself a little self-massage. So I'm just coming up so that you can see where I'm working here. We talked about hip flexors in another class, and I'm thinking about right now the internal hip flexors. So I was talking about the outside of the hip. Here I'm going to think of going into the inside of the pelvic bowl. So I'm kind of next to the bone towards the inside. I'm going to give that a little massage here, a little massage on the other side. So lying down doing that. Depending on things that might be going on in your abdomen, you don't want to go digging around in here, certainly not if you're pregnant, but also if there are, depending on when you've eaten, other hormonal things. And many people are just very sensitive in these muscles. So with this, I generally will have people massage themselves here as opposed to maybe having somebody, doing partner things, because this is a very personal and potentially sensitive area. So once I've given that a little massage, now I'm going to try to lift again, and having made a little bit of extra space in the inside of the pelvis, all of a sudden it's easier to lift from the outside. So just taking that up and down, and hopefully you're having a similar before and after experience. And while you're up there, also just think about, well, what would it be like to lift up a leg? What would it be like to lift up the other leg? So again, in order for me to stay on balance here, all of a sudden this leg, especially out here, going to have to work a little harder to keep me upright. Now this side, having to work a little harder to keep me upright. And we'll just take that a couple more times. And last one. And then I'm going to take that down and just let it relax. And I'm going to take a second to just kind of roll myself a little side-side, give that some slight release. So the way of finding this, feeling this, I just want to check my notes for a second. So looking to feel this support, again, along the side. If I come to lying on my side here, and hopefully you can see me well enough, I'm going to look to lift this leg. Again, I'm staying more or less in parallel to get the activation here. Now, for most of us, if I'm working from this place, the leg is not necessarily going to go very high because the bones start to run up against each other. And therefore, if I'm going to take my leg up higher here, then I start to move up here at the waist as opposed to moving in the hip. So for right now, just looking for where is that place. And if you start off a little bit too turned out, or especially if your top hip is not right on top of the other one, then that is going to throw the support more into the front of the leg here, as opposed to really feeling that outside. So one way that you can help yourself to find this, if you're having trouble, because sometimes it can be hard to find, is if I put myself right up against a wall here. And I want to think especially that I'm trying to get that underneath hip tucked in right next to the wall. so that, again, I'm not leaning towards the back. And then if I think of sliding my leg up the wall, and particularly if I'm trying to get the top part of my thigh, the part closest to my hip, to reach towards the wall, if I'm sliding up and down here, as opposed to being a little too far to the front, which again is going to get more of the hip flexors. So then I can activate this a little bit more. I might want to keep my hand on my hip to make sure that, again, that I'm not moving from my waist as opposed to moving in the hip. And often it doesn't take too many for this to start to feel a little bit tired. So I don't do too many go for the burn exercises, but this one may burn a little bit. So then I'm just going to let that relax for a moment. Stack that on top of the other leg and just give it a little bit of a breather. And then going to go and look for that on the other side. And again, you may have the experience of one side being a little bit easier to find than the other. So coming to the second side, again, I'm going to look to try to set myself up as square as possible. And first, just going up and down. So right now, I'm not against the wall. I'm a little bit away from it and trying to find out, okay, am I moving like when I was standing up earlier? Is the space between my pelvis and this bony part on my leg, am I using that to close? As opposed to, again, moving through my waist here. And if I'm struggling with that, once again, I might move towards the wall and have a sense of sliding this up and down. And for right now, I'm focusing again in parallel, because if I turn it out, that puts a little bit more of the hip flexors more towards the ceiling, so therefore they're doing more of the lifting. And again, it doesn't take usually very much of this to start to feel those muscles getting very active and maybe a little bit tired. And so then I'll let that relax and set that down for a moment. Okay, so going back to the first side, going to work through a little bit of a sequence to work on this a little bit more. So going to start with two bent legs, and now I'm away from the wall again. And first going to work through some rotation. So I'm going to let my leg turn out and turn in, and out, and in, and out, and in. So here I'm just rolling the leg in the socket, and out, and in. Now, again, I'm going to look to try to stay parallel and lift up both my knee and my foot. Ideally staying, again, in parallel so that they're both lifting up the same amount as opposed to being a little turned in or a little turned out. So looking for that sense of the parallel, kind of similar to a parallel tendu again. And in this case, I do have the leg a little in front of me, so hip flexors may be working some, but I'm also looking for this sense of the support here. And then I'm going to just, because again, I may need a little bit more hip flexor stretch, I'm just going to take this into a stretch for a moment. And then I'm going to let this go. So another way that I work with this sometimes times is working with the opposition through the body. So especially if I want to avoid pulling too much from hiking my hip, if I reach and think of pulling my arm and my leg in opposite directions, that's going to keep it a little bit more movement from the hip because I'm really pulling this long in opposition and keeping that side lengthened. So then as I have this up here, I can also go a little front, a little back. And I'm still using the reach of the arm to help give me some support. And I'm also using my core strength to keep from falling off of this. Then I could also take it into a little rond de jambe. Again, don't do too many of these because it does get a little bit tiring. I'm going to go back. And then to give that a rest, I'm sliding my hips forward and back. So right hip goes forward, pulls back, forward, pulls back. And then I can also take this into a little bit of a circle. And back the other way. Okay, so to give that some rest and some stretch, again, there's, having worked those muscles rather significantly, sometimes it can be difficult to just go and lie on the side that's just been working. So to give it some stretch, I was working my right leg, so I'm going to take my left, cross it over the right, and going to use my left leg to pull my right leg across. And that starts to create a stretch all along through here. Different people will feel it in different places. I may feel it in the flexors here as well. And then I'm going to, again, think of activating through here to pull myself back up. So I go over, and if this leg were in here, I'd be pulling this up. So it's pulling me back. And then I pull it into the stretch. And it pulls me back. And pull into the stretch. And pulls me back. One more time. Pulling into the stretch. And pulls me back. And then I'm going to switch my crossing. I'm still thinking about this right hip here, but I'm going to keep my leg turned out. I want to use my hand, we've done this other times, to stabilize my knee and going to flex and point through the foot. And by doing that, getting that leg movement, or the ankle movement, but not letting the rest of my leg move, sends a signal up into my hip. Create a little bit of release. Okay, so now I think I'm ready to move on to the other side. So going through the sequence that we did a few moments ago. So I'm starting with legs bent, one on top of the other, and I turn it out and turn in, and turn out and in. So here again, rolling my leg in the socket. And good. So then going to lift up in parallel. And again, I'm thinking of trying to activate through this outer part of the hip to take my leg up in this parallel line and to carry it back down in the parallel. And up, and up, and up. One more time. I'm going to reach back, grab my foot. So again, I'm doing some stretch of the hip flexors. In this particular case, catching a bit more of the quads, the sartorius, the external hip flexors here, whereas the self-massage that I did before was focusing more on the internal ones. So after I've allowed that to stretch out a bit, I'm going to reach the leg long. I'm going to reach my arm overhead so that again, as I pull the two sides apart, that's going to keep me long through my torso here, may also help to give me more of the core stability so that again, I'm not falling too far forward, not falling too far back. So pulling those two ends away from each other. And with this particular thing, if your shoulder ends up a little bit by your ear, don't worry about that too much right now. And reach. I'm still trying to keep the leg just slightly back so that I'm emphasizing the activation back here. Then I may keep that up, go a little front and back. And again, the arm, the reach through my torso, the opposition, helping to keep me on balance. And then I'll take a little rond de jambe. Might be starting to get kind of tired. And back the other way. And then I'll just set that down on top of the other leg and roll my left hip forward and back. Or I can take a little circle. First going in one direction. And then back the other way. Okay, so here, coming again onto my back and going to let this side get a little bit stretched out. So now, once again, crossing the right over the left so that I can pull my left side over towards the right, getting this reach. And then I let that side bring it back. So I'm working a stretch of the muscle against a contraction of the muscle, and a stretch and a contraction, and that could be a way to be more active. Sometimes passive stretches can be a little hard, especially in a place like this, a little hard to get at more of a passive stretch. Yes, I can hang out in this stretch a little bit and just kind of let that cook, and I may choose to do that at a certain point. But especially if I'm thinking about getting warmed up to dance or getting ready to move, then something a little more dynamic can be more helpful. So then I'm going to cross over the other way. And again, stabilizing my knee, get a flexed point through the foot, and use this nervous system chain. So the message is, the message that there's a stretch happening here, working its way up, creating the sense of a stretch up in the hip as well. even though the hip isn't really moving. And letting that go. And then going to come up to standing again and see what it feels like. So, I've started to get a lot of activation going on into this place here. So then I'm going to take this into some more standing movements and going to work with my block here. So first, going to bring the block over. If you have a bar, that's great. In fact, let's see, can I set up over here? I think maybe I can, so that you can see me facing more straight on. So here, standing up on one leg, and right at the moment, first just going to think of allowing this leg to hang, and I'm keeping the sense of being upright on this leg. So I'm still very active in that gluteus medius outer part of the hip here, and going to talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But in the meantime, I'm looking to just make a little bit more space, a little bit more length in this side. And then when I go and step down, the side all of a sudden does feel taller. So then I'll just put it this way to do the second side, so I'm not completely facing away from you. So coming up here, and now letting my other leg hang. So I'm just taking a moment to really let this hang downwards while still keeping my support up on the standing leg. And as that flows downward, I might still want to think, while on the leg that I've already lengthened, I may still want to think of that leg lengthening as well, so that it doesn't start to feel compressed. And once I've been up here for a little bit, then I can step down and again have two sides feeling long. So then, to emphasize this movement a little bit further, I'm going to keep my hand on my hip here so that you can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to sink down into the hip. So for some of you, that may be a problem when you go to stand on your standing leg, that you end up sinking too much into the hip. So to get out of that, I'm not going to lift this side up, but I'm going to push this side down. And in particular, I want to think that I'm connecting this outer hip here, down the back of my leg to my inside heel, so that I can push, and then I might fall down again. And push, and sink down. So I'm really actively pushing this leg down against the block, and that causes my hips to come back up to level. So I've sunk here, I've dropped this left side, then I push with the right leg, brings me back up to level, and I sink and push and sink and push and sink. One more time, push and sink. So then to do that on the second side, I think I'll just stay here so that I'm facing you a little bit more. And again, I'm going to sink into that and push and sink and push. And if you're in a place where you can turn around or have something to hold on to on the other side, feel free to do that. Sink and push and sink. And again, I'm not thinking of lifting up this side. This side is just along for the ride. And push and sink and push. Just going to take that a couple more times. Outer hip to inner heel, outer hip to inner heel. And stepping that down. And going to do one more block exercise, and this will be against the wall. So what I'm going to do, just to show you before I turn and I'm to the wall, I'm going to put the block up on my pelvis here. So I don't want to be down by the leg because that's going to get in the way. And I'm going to take So I've got one end, my hip, then I'm going to put this end against the wall. So I'm going to stand as close to the wall, trying to get my feet really under me, and in particular, I'm trying right now to get the outer leg under me because that's going to be the standing leg. So as I'm standing here, then I'm just going to take just a little lift of the leg that's close to the wall. So the exercise is for this standing leg here. And again, that this is going to be very active to keep me up on this leg. And lift. And this leg doesn't have to go very high. In fact, I might not want to lift it high so that I don't knock myself backwards or want to hike the hip. So it's really just to take weight off of that leg and have the sense of the standing leg. So then I'm going to take that away, turn to the other side. So again, I've got the block against my bones up here with enough room that if this were the wall, that again, I'm letting this leg move without it moving the block around. So then I'm pinning to the wall, trying to get in. If you have a corridor where you can brace your hand against an opposite wall, sometimes that's helpful as well. And I'm just going to take this a little up and down. Again, I'm focusing right into this hip here and feeling the support on my standing leg, keeping me in place, helping to keep me lifted as this leg takes weight away, takes weight back, takes weight away, takes weight back. So letting that go. So that's a lot of support things here. Let me just take this into slightly bigger movement. So taking this Tendu before, we're going to take it a little bit further than we did. So I'm going to take just a little sort of drop and rebound. So I'm going to brush this leg out, land on it, and push. And again, I'm using this place that it's pushing through my leg to transfer me onto my standing leg. So here I weight on the left, weight on the right, weight on the left. And the weight on the right is kind of a hover. So I'm not necessarily arriving on this side. I'm not necessarily looking for the balance. I'm thinking of this as a hover, and then I fall, and hover, and fall, and hover, and fall one more time, and falls. But that I'm using this push off through this outer leg to project me through space. So doing same thing the other side. Going to take this out and take it down and push, and push, and push, and push. And I'm doing all of this in parallel because that's a very clear way to get a sense of this, but it will be involved in turnout, in other rotations, other movements as well. And here I'm hovering and then moving back onto, so I've got this rebound to push off and finding the weight and pushing it away and finding the weight and pushing it away. So having done all of this now, I'm going to give this a little bit of release. And for today's version, just going to take a ball. And you might not want to use a very hard ball for this. You can, and some people like pain more than others. But again, this can be a kind of sensitive area. But just going to give this a little massage. And those overcrossing and other stretches that we did earlier will help with that as well. Okay, so then I'll take the ball and, well, Let me just lie down for a second, see what the two sides feel like. So this side feels more dropped into the ground. So now I'll give the other side a little massage as well. So I'm just tucking the ball under my hip and going into the space, again, between my pelvis bone and the outer part of my leg. So really I'm just rolling around on it a little bit, up and down a little bit on it. And you can find your own version of this. Sorry, the ball's squeaky. And again, I'll take a moment just to lie down and have a sense of having two relaxed hips now, and that letting my weight drop into the floor. Okay. And just one more time, just going to take just a little parallel plie and stretch. Again, thinking of my lift, my support here, and how that also may help to take me up into releve. Okay, so I hope that this has been helpful to you. Feel free to reach out if you have questions, and I will see you with the next class next time. Thank you very much.